Shakira was alone in the studio at night, writing her new song. Suddenly she heard a whisper in her ear. "This song is mine." She thought she was tired, until her own voice came through the speakers. But she wasn't singing, and someone was breathing behind her. That night she realized that some melodies aren't inspiration. They're a call. A little after midnight, the studio door closed with a heavy groan. There was only one person inside, the mysterious star of the stage, the woman loved by millions. But tonight there were no bright lights, no thunderous applause. There were no joyful rhythms of music either. This time the studio was filled with a different atmosphere, cold, an invisible robbery that was more disturbing than peaceful. He had chosen to be alone. He wanted to work in the absence of everyone to create his new song. As always, he thought that silence would inspire him. A faint red light was shining in the studio. The glass of the recording booth was like a mirror reflected in the surrounding darkness. He stood in front of the microphone and closed his eyes. He regulated his breathing and slowly began to hum the first notes. Suddenly, a strange humming was heard in his ears. It sounded like a distant whisper. He stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" he called out loudly. There was no answer. He checked the technical room that controlled the studio. It was empty. This place was completely reserved for him tonight. Silence fell again. He thought to himself that it was due to fatigue. He had really worked hard in recent months. Endless tours, interviews, writing. No doubt his mind was exhausted, and his brain was playing little games with him. He began to sing again. But this time the voice was closer and clearer. He heard a cold, strange sentence from his headphones. "This song is mine." Shocked, he pushed the microphone away, took out his headphones. His heart was beating fast. The air inside had suddenly changed, as if it had become even colder. He turned to look at the walls. The shadows seemed to be moving. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself. At that moment, the lights flickered on and then went out completely. Darkness. A thick, dense darkness enveloped the interior. Only the faint LED lights of the devices were visible. He took his phone out of his pocket and turned on the flashlight. But the light on the phone was not steady. It was flickering. The battery was still almost fully charged, but the screen light seemed to be going out on its own initiative. He shone the light on the glass of the cabin. For a moment, he saw another silhouette reflected there. It was someone other than himself. He froze. He slowly approached the glass. In an instant, the light returned. Only his reflection was visible in the glass. Taking a deep breath, he whispered, "Just stress." But it was the sound of breathing that broke the silence. Very close. A panting that could be felt right at the back of his neck. He turned around with lightning speed. There was no one. Emptiness surrounded him. Suddenly, a strange voice came from the studio speakers. It was his own voice, but he was not speaking. The voice was singing a beautiful melody with ancient tones that he did not recognize. It sounded like a lament that had come to him from the distant past. The speaker suddenly trembled and rose. The sound became sharper and sharper, and suddenly everything stopped. Silence fell again. Anxiety surged inside him. He wanted to run away. He immediately headed for the door, grabbed the handle to open it. But the door did not move. It was locked. He shouted. The walls reflecting the sounds remained unanswered. At that moment, he heard slow, crawling footsteps behind him. The steps were slowly approaching, as if dragging on the ground. And he had no desire to turn around. It was even terrifying to know the meaning of these sounds. but the sounds were getting closer and echoing in his ears with a broken harmony. Behind his ear, a gentle, identical whisper rose. "They hear you, but I see you." In the momentary shuddering silence brought by the whisper, he suddenly turned and shouted. This time there was something in front of him. The silhouette of a woman standing sadly in the darkness. Her cheap hair was falling on her shoulders, her head was bowed down. Her face was indistinguishable. Only the feeling of emptiness in her place was shuddering. "Who are you?" he shouted in his endless terror. The silhouette moved slightly and then showed his raised head. But there was no face. Instead, it was covered in dense darkness. But in that darkness, a pair of weak, pale points of light shone. Eyes. The silhouette of the woman disappeared in an instant, as if completely melting into thin air. She retreated and leaned against the wall. His heart was beating so fast that he could feel its roar in his ears. At that moment, all the monitors in the studio lit up at the same time. A video began to play on the screens. This video featured him, but it wasn't from today. It was a piece from one of his old concerts. He was dancing on stage. Suddenly, his image in the video turned to the camera, looking directly at it. He smiled. And this smile was neither warm nor sincere. It seemed completely cold and empty. Then he on the screen began to speak. "Tonight is your turn." After what he said, the monitors suddenly exploded and the screens went out. Everything was covered in darkness again. His knees were shaking, his body was afraid to move. A minute later, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. He had received a notification. There was an audio file. Its name was written in one word: "End." He looked at the sender's section to understand who had sent it and couldn't believe his eyes. His name was written on it. In shock, he opened the file and began to listen. First, there were the sounds of breathing, and then his own voice. "If you can hear this, it means it's too late." Suddenly, he felt the door behind him slowly open with a heavy and terrible creak. He got up in despair, turned to the door and looked. But there was no ordinary corridor there. Behind the door, there was only deep and unknown darkness. He felt that the studio itself opened into another place. He wanted to retreat, but suddenly two hands reached out from the darkness, thin, long. They looked like human hands, but their fingers were mysteriously elongated. The hands were crawling along the ground and moving towards him. Then something appeared from the darkness. Its face was still gone, but this time there was a mouth, an unnaturally wide, lipless black mouth. The being began to speak. When his voice came out, it was as if many voices were speaking together. "We wanted your voice, but you called us," he screamed in horror. "I have done nothing." The being slowly advanced towards him. "You wanted inspiration, you wanted memory, you awakened dead melodies." He suddenly remembered everything. A few months ago, he had researched old folk melodies, old songs with unknown authors that he had found in the archives. He had performed them in the studio. The being came closer. They should be forgotten. In an instant, the walls of the room began to change. In place of the studio, ancient stone walls appeared. The smell of earth spread in the air. He suddenly found himself in another place, in an old, abandoned theater. He stood alone in the middle of the stage. The hall was pitch black. Suddenly, countless silhouettes appeared on the chairs. They were all looking at him, but they had no faces. They were just deep, empty darkness. Then they all spoke at once. "Read." And he shook his head. "No." But black, snake-like roots emerged from the ground, squeezing his legs and immobilizing him. "Sing." He trembled with fear and began to cry. He had no other choice but to sing. At first, he began to sing that unfamiliar melody in a low, trembling voice. But over time, something changed. His voice began to sound stronger, harsher. A black depth descended on his voice. For a long time, he did not even realize that he was singing, as if this voice did not come from within him, but some alien force was singing through him. The figures in the hall began to move. They walked toward the stage with heavy steps. Suddenly, they all disappeared at once, and he was back in the studio. The atmosphere was completely quiet. The lights were on, everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. He looked at his phone. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. His hands were shaking. He packed his things and hurriedly left the studio. The whole world was amazed. The song he created had extraordinary power. People reported that they felt different emotions when listening to the song. Some shed tears, some felt fear, and some were afraid to have dreams at night after this music. Soon, videos began to appear on social media. Some people who listened to the song claimed to hear strange whispers in the background. Those who delved deeper noted that at certain seconds of the music, a faint second voice could be heard. It seemed to be similar to her voice, but not exactly the same. One evening, she was alone at home. Her song began to play on the radio. She listened intently. But this time, in the middle of the song, she came across a part she had never heard before. Her voice on the radio said softly, "We are here." Surprised, she approached the radio. The music suddenly stopped. There was a deafening silence that echoed everywhere. Then, from the darkness behind her, came the sound of a familiar breath, a whisper from the back of her neck, eerily real. "It's concert time." She slowly turned and looked. In the corner, in the darkness, silhouettes were lined up. They were back. This time there were more of them. And they were not going to go away. Because now, the music he played had spread all over the world. With each listener, they grew a little louder. A faint melody played throughout the house all night. Even when no devices were working, the music still went on. And those eerie whispers, they got closer and closer in the darkness of the night.